Hello, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, wherever you may find us. We are live and we are continuing our conversation on neurodevelopmental milestones. Unfortunately, we weren't able to make last week just because of something that came up, but we're here again and we are ready to rock and roll. So we're going to continue on this conversation on the CDC changed their milestone recommendations, right? So, and kind of my understanding is they didn't put definitive borders for when they want things to occur. So you can imagine there could be a lot of leeway in that, and that can also cause a lot of confusion. And overall, I thought it was a poor decision, and I didn't see any science to back it up. And I don't believe Heather saw any of that as well. So, but we kind of had discussed some of that in the previous conversations. But let's jump onto this. So, our last conversation was on crawling. We talked about that. And the importance of crawling and the importance of bringing the hemispheres together and how it allows the brain to communicate, and very, very powerful conversation. And I'm all for crawling. We shouldn't skip crawling. A lot of times parents will think, oh, my kid skipped crawling, that's a good thing, right? They went right to walking, but it's not inherently a good thing. And so oftentimes I will have to kind of go back with some kids and teach them actually how to crawl. You will find adults that don't know how to crawl, believe it or not. And so, with all of that, we kind of discussed that. So let's jump into the walking. So they didn't, as far as I could tell, I think they may have pushed it back to 15 months as an acceptable time to start walking, which in my opinion is wrong. I don't know any data that would support that, but let's talk about that. Walking, there's a lot to walking. It's not quite as simple as people may think. It takes a lot of neurology, a lot of muscles, a lot of just coordination, balance, eyes, vestibular system, all of that's involved, strength, core strength, right? And so it's actually a very convoluted topic if you really dive deep into it. And one of the things I found was kind of fun was that when they trying to teach robots how to walk, they realized that humans are just catching themselves from falling, right? So pretty cool stuff. So it takes a lot of data, a lot of information. Can you hear me, Heather?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm using really good attention skills today.
Okay, right. You're honed in. I just want to make sure you can hear me. But we're going to jump into this. But yes, it's a convoluted thing. It's a very powerful thing too. It's very important, and it tells us neurologically where the child is from a neural, developmental, neuromuscular, all of these things development. So let's jump in. Heather, when a parent comes in and says, "Hey, you know what? Maybe my child started crawling at 11 months, 12 months, started walking maybe around 15, 16 months." Is that setting off any kind of like, okay, I need to hone in on some stuff or I need to dig a little deeper here? Or you just kind of wash that away as that's nothing?
That is very relevant. Um, you can kind of think as when you're learning to use your gross motor skills, you're also growing pathways in the brain where you have big picture thinking, and which is important for perspective taking, getting the gist of things instead of coming across as defiant or argumentative about irrelevant details. When in the first stages of crawling, or sorry, of walking, uh, it is stimulating a part of the brain where you grow a sense of self and you're learning about how your body relates to the world, and then you get to start understanding I have an effect on the world. When I do this happens. And by the age of 24 months, it has really moved into parts of the brain responsible for attention and figuring out how to complete tasks and so forth. So all of those are putting kids behind where they're supposed to be growing on these cognitive abilities. And I think we said this a couple of weeks ago, but it bears repeating. It's not just about when they start walking. It is also, is there anything kind of slow or awkward or not automated about it? The more energy the body is having to put into locomotion, the less present they're going to be, the less they're going to pick up on all kinds of things in the environment that help them learn to understand their world. It's very predictive of there's been even very recent research talking about the link between walking, when it happens, what it looks like, and being able to predict autism and other neurodevelopmental struggles.
100%. Yeah, that's what that's where the research is leading to. And you know I would say 100%, but there's always an outlier and everything. But I would say 100% of my kiddos with inattention, with focus concerns, with autonomic, struggles or functions, which is tying into everything, right? So it's tying into focus, attention, and immune function, and all this other stuff. All have gross motor, so large motor dysfunction, whether it be core, whether it be pelvic, whether it be the combo. And so it's, you can see it and you can pick it up pretty quick, especially if you know what you're looking for. Awkward gait, all that other thing, slumping of the shoulders, rounding of the shoulders, forward head posture. You really start picking it up, and you can almost see it essentially immediately if you're looking for it. But that's one of the things I'm looking for right away. I
Yeah,
walk in, right? I'm
yeah. Like what you were just talking about is so important, because if the core is weak, or there's different things that are, and of course sometimes the neck has not gotten as strong as it needed to be, or some of the strength and the tone that we need for walking didn't happen when kids skip crawling. But anything that does not have me upright and balanced, it sets off equilibrium. That's the captain of the ship that tells the rest of the sensory motor system what to do, and it's much harder to engage with others. It puts more eye strain, and eye muscles and all the visual perception things already require about 25% of the brain's function. We learn to use both sides of our body in a gross motor way first, and that translates into fine motor cross-body coordination. The eyes teaming together, that's another type of fine motor coordination. It's just that we can't see those muscle movements in the same way. And so you don't realize how those things translate. Teaching the ears to work together, it is just foundational for so many things. And it's not just about, can they do it? Is it laborious? Is it automated?
Yeah. And so, two things that you said I want to kind of jump back to is the first one being, you have to kind of think of yourself as a battery, and every sensory thing takes a little drain, right? Like think about different apps, right? Like the eyes, the ears, the vestibular system, joint movement, proprioception. All of this they're all little apps running in the background, taking part of that battery. And the muscle skeletal system is a big one, right? So postural stuff is a big one. It helps guide us, helps navigate us, helps get us out of danger, is very important for survival, aka survival. And so the brain's like, okay, I need to move to survive. So I'm going to dedicate resources here and steal from here. So you're going to steal from attention and focus and other things to do that, because motor movement is survival movement, right? So you need to. So you think about that. Their movement is awkward. It's not coordinated. It's not smooth. Well, ultimately, the brain's going to start giving resources to that over other resources. And so you see not only a muscle imbalance, but a brain imbalance as far as resources, right? And so that plays a massive role in so many parents. They're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, you're just a big battery, big phone, and you're dedicating resources. And the big one is the muscle skeleton. The brain and the muscles are massive consumers of energy, and that's what a lot of your energy is going towards.
Yeah, definitely. And every step you take, your foot is hitting the ground, and that is giving us proprioceptive input that helps kids start growing body awareness.
Yep.
Body awareness is, we grow a sense of self before I have to know, who am I, before I can feel that I have self-worth. It helps me understand my impact of, I do this and this happens. So cause and effect, problem solving. Body awareness, if I'm having to pay too much attention to the act of locomotion, I don't have as many resources. My battery's getting drained, so I don't have as many resources to connect how I'm feeling with what my body language and facial expressions, gestures are doing that either add to or take away from the message. And then I don't learn to read nonverbal cues of other people. It's just very important. Sometimes when, on the flip side, if you have runners and kids who are just going all the time, sometimes that is immediately attributed to ADHD, when in fact it might be, I don't feel my body, and subconsciously running, that pounding really, really helps. But all of those are just very natural ways of exploring the environment. And then I'm starting to get curious. What's this? What's this? And from their language grows. Everything is just so intricately intertwined. And I know we're talking about developmental milestones, but just another connection for why walking specifically is so important. There has been really fascinating research coming out about older adults he might have started noticing some memory decline with or without it being dementia. And studies have found that walking is a higher predictor of stimulating the hippocampus. The hippocampus is where we have a lot of memory as well as language skills. It is stronger than dancing. For dance, so dance is very good exercise for many reasons. But when we're talking about, so much research has been on gray matter, which is very important, self-regulation, lots of things there. But white matter, where you really grow brain connections, neuroplasticity that y'all heard us talk about, the pliability of the brains. Right. Seniors can grow brain connections through walking, and it's been found more powerful than a lot of other exercises. So I think that just speaks powerfully to the importance of walking and how it connects the brain.
Right. And okay, so you're always bringing up two things that I talk about. One, remind me to go back to this. We'll talk about interoception, but we're talking about just the elderly and movement. I mean, there's a strong quote unquote correlation, but also probably causation here too, with their posture, their motor movement, and mental decline. Right, like you will see motor movement start declining along with mental decline, like memory, focus, attention, logical thought, all of that stuff, and they're very tied. And what what you're saying essentially is, as the body decays, if we're not upkeeping it right. So I'm a big proponent of, you keep your body healthy, strong, you walk, right? Something pretty easy. You will keep those mental faculties going, because it's when we start sitting that starts decaying. But one of the things you talked about that I think is very, very important is interoception. So hitting the ground and then us picking up, registering, that's me, and all that. And there's such a key component to that in mental health. Because interoception, the ability to understand self, allows us to understand other people. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the, I actually have met with several families lately who have specifically said, most of the time people say things in this realm, but it has been so specific to, we have taken our kids to play therapy, or they name different things they've tried to teach them coping strategies, and they just refuse to use them. That is not the parent being just off the wall. Where'd they come up with that? That's what it looks like. Mm-hmm. But in order to use coping strategies, I have to know I need them in the first place. And one of the ways our bodies knows that we need to do that, like we're starting to get escalated, is that our internal sensory system, body awareness, kind of does body mapping for us. So if any of you out there have ever taken just a deep breath, you're like, why'd I do that? That was random. Was I holding my breath before? Or you just know that you're at work or something. You just know, I'm taking a break. And you don't know why in that moment it was time to take a break, because you don't really particularly feel stressed. Our internal sensory system, body awareness, gives us those signals. It reads the room and is like, hey, you're starting to get a little escalated, stressed. We're not feeling stressed because that feeling has only gone from 0 to 3 on a scale of 0 to 10. But we do that thing. It's all a subconscious process. And because of that, it goes right back down to 0. We don't even register it as an emotional event. Now, imagine someone who is not in touch with their bodies. They don't feel that tension that's forming, or how they're clenching their jaw, or that little weird feeling in their stomach. And I didn't know I needed that. And so their emotion just seems to go from 0 to 60 at the flip of a switch. And now it is too late. Once I'm at an 8, 9, 10 on those emotions, those regulation strategies, it's not that they don't work. They don't work nearly as effectively, and there can be a lot of damage done in the meantime. And so really you can think of it as a yellow warning signal, letting you know, because of the body-brain connection, our body gives us signals. When you have body awareness, I can have kids do a body map, and I literally will have them draw on their bodies how they feel when they're starting to escalate, and then they know to start picking up on those keys. We have to get body awareness there first.
Huge. Yeah, so and a lot of times it isn't spoken about, but we have 5 outer senses: right, sight, hearing, taste, all that fun stuff. But we also have inner senses: vestibular, proprioception, and autonomic. And so combined, we're understanding our internal and external experiences. And what you're saying is, if they don't understand their internal, then you can't really, then external doesn't make a whole lot of sense either to them. So, and going back to kind of what you mentioned before, we learn internal through movement and touch and all of this other stuff too, and just self-regulation, all this stuff that's so important that's building during that time of crawling and walking and all this other stuff. So, there's a lot of things onboarding at one time, right?
Right. And that's the thing. It is just about with anything we're talking about. You don't learn reading by practicing just certain one skill at a time. Let's practice sounding out words. It's not that there's not value to that. Effective readers have multiple strategies that they're using all at the same time. That is why brain connectivity is so important. That's why you don't want to work on one skill and then the other and then the other, because it requires the left and right hemisphere to communicate, the front and the back of the brain. We've talked before about how the cerebellum, which for the longest time was thought to be pretty much solely about sports coordination, gross motor, a lot of motor skills, it's involved in 75 to 80% of our cognitive functions. Every kind of learning you can think about: attention, memory, regulation, impulse control, problem solving, creativity, literacy. And so we're missing out on a big component of the fact that 2 million neurons fire off from the cerebellum when we move. Tells us that it's very, very, very important for all layers of brain function as well.
Yeah. And so when we're talking about all this onboarding, right, like ideally they're all coming in symmetrically within, just kind of all boom, 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 boom. And when we skip a step or we delay a step, that what needs to happen is we either need to figure out a way around it, which delays us in an area, or we just kind of jump ahead to something and we hyper advance in that area. And so you get kids that, are really skilled early on in some things, which is also kind of a warning sign for me. Like, we all love to excel at things, right? But when they're beating their peers by, months or years in certain skill sets, that's telling you something about what's going on, and maybe things that they did miss or skipped or were altered. And so the brain figured out a way around, but it's not the best route around.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because compensation decreases quality of life. There are instances in which, thank goodness, we can compensate. A lot of y'all watching know that my dad only has half a brain because he had a very large brain tumor. He, on a certain level, doesn't have any options but to compensate, although we were still able to stimulate growth of new neural pathways in him at the age of 61. Never too late. Cool. But the harder I'm working at one thing and having to find workarounds to that, it will rob out of other buckets. It's great. I mean, all of our kids are a set of strengths and struggles. I mean, all human beings, with or without neurodevelopmental struggles. It's okay. Most of us are going to have certain skills that are just more organic for us. One's here and one's here. You can have 14 and 16-year-olds playing on the same baseball team, because even though their ability levels might be a little different, they're still in the same realm and can work together as a team. You, however, are not going to have a 10-year-old and a 16-year-old on the same team, because they are on two different ability levels. They can't work well as a team. Right. You can have the best quarterback in the world. If you have a wide receiver who can't catch the ball, it doesn't matter. That is the equivalent of needing memory and attention and motor and sensory and, all of those skills, at least in the same realm where they can work together, because they can either elevate one another up or drag things down. And sometimes those things aren't obvious until later. We have a lot of kids who are this is not about intelligence. Correct. My child's so smart, so they're not trying. That's what it looks like, perhaps. Or they don't have anything wrong with them, or else they wouldn't be making A's. It is great they have this strength. Having certain struggles in the brain has nothing to do with whether a person is smart or not. It is really about, when you listen to a band, you can have the best guitar player, best singer, best drummer. If they are playing in different tempos, it messes up the entire performance. That's how it is in our bodies and our brains.
100%. Woo, that was good. All right. I like that. And I like the football analogy, because we're in Texas, right? So football, very, very powerful. Okay. So let's kind of just summarize this. But I mean, like we talked about, this is very important, because as a whole, I expect my kids to be walking, ideally by, around 11 to 12 months. All right. At least getting up and kind of posturally. And I do understand there's some preemies. And so, yeah, there is some grace in these periods. I do want you to understand that it's not always rock hard. But when we start kicking this out to 15, 16, I've kept kids that come in that didn't walk to 18 or 20 months. That is very concerning. And so, but also not only the time, but you mentioned it, like how they walk, right? Like just like with crawling, we talked about that. Some scooted, some did other things, but just their gait and their overall walk. You have some kids that swing legs, so they don't move their. I have kids that sometimes didn't move their arms when they walk, and the parents are like, that's kind of silly. But I didn't know what it meant at the time, or I didn't understand, or I was told it was okay, right? So all of these things are very, very important. But let's kind of talk about this. Let's jump forward into the idea that we have crawling, then walking, and then the next thing we're going to be talking about is speech. And so, are we building that up with this motor movement? Are we building into developing parts of the brain? Because cerebellum, it's also involved in everything, right? Into speech. Is this kind of building into something, or is this completely something different? Does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yes, I mean that. And I'm so glad you brought that up too, because I don't think that's intuitive unless you're kind of in our field. But there are a lot of students who are thought to just have, and I say just, I mean, but that's what they just have a language delay. That's a big deal. And that comes from a lot of different places. But a lot of times those same kids have a motor planning problem with speech, just like they have motor planning problems with their gross motor. You have things that your lips must do, your tongue, your teeth, the positioning of those things. If my body awareness is poor, I don't know what those things are doing, and I don't know the difference between tensing up my tongue for a strong S versus, and you might hear a lisp. That's just one example. Right. But if you have kids who, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I love you. But I always hope people say I love you and they mean it, and it's actually with thought and not a habit. But let's just be real, like rote comments. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? Those, sometimes kids can say those kinds of things because they get a muscle memory going on those. But if they are creating a novel utterance, they're putting together a very unique sentence for this situation, is it less fluid? If you see herky jerky or weird timing in some of the gross motor, if you see fine motor, we have cranial nerves wired together. Fine motor and oral motor muscles are wired together in a lot of ways. So, and if it's so effortful to get the speech out, they might even give up. And then people start anticipating their needs. We talked about the hippocampus. I mean, that is a language access center that can get shut down when your autonomic function, your fight or flight, is impaired. There are studies on amnesia and how even like pronouns get messed up. If you have kids who struggle with the sentence structure and putting words in the correct order and knowing that when to use I versus me, all of those things are related to the same things we're saying are grown when you're walking. So pretty much just across the board, when you think about it, we learn rhythm in our bodies first before we have time management. We learn coordination through gross motor activities, and then that helps our brains be organized and be able to manage a project that requires multiple skills working together. You can just carry that out across virtually everything, really.
100%. Yeah, so our mouth and tongue they're all muscles, right? So if we don't have fine motor movement, or if we don't have all this sorts of stuff, we can build on this next week. But it's all kind of building on each other, and just like coordination of movement requires a set of a rhythm and different neurology firing and different muscles firing, so does thought and then speech, right? So as we're coordinating our thoughts and then trying to coordinate how we want to articulate that, that's not quite as easy as you think it is. It's built on a bunch of neurology below that. And on top of that, what innervates this is the brain stem, right? The nerves coming out of here come out of the same area of the brain stem. So if you go back weeks into our conversation, we were talking about primitive reflexes. And a lot of that neurology is right in that same region. I mean, they're all kind of bunched in there. And so it's all built on each other. We're layering this all together. And so that's why we want to talk about this, because it's so fundamental. When you start looking back, like speech has a lot to do with gross and fine motor movement, which is built on crawling and primitive reflexes and all this stuff. And so really you have a story here when you start looking at people, and you can start understanding their struggles, which I think is ultimately why I get on this every week, is I want parents to just understand their kids, right? Like they understand the struggle. They kind of like, oh, okay, there's a reason why. It's not that they're lazy, right, which is a common label we hear. Not saying parents are saying that, but just, they're lazy, or they just never listen, or, there's all sorts of frustrations that can come up. And it's not that, it's not the kid is lazy or doesn't listen. It's just they're churning, right?
Yeah.
Hidden churn, right? And so, talking about that, that's ultimately what I hope you all get out of this, is there's a reason why these behaviors happen. And it's so often mislabeled as something that it's really not. So
Yeah. And just to kind of run this out, just in slightly different words from what we've said so far, kids may catch up on walking. Does that mean that all of the cognitive development that was supposed to take place throughout the process caught up as well? Because walking is about more than walking, just like crawling is about more than crawling. Just another framework for this. Well, they eventually walked. It doesn't mean that all the layers of brain development got filled in. And like Brian said, because they may have skipped over some things to compensate and get to where it looks okay on the surface. So many times the ramifications of that don't show up until years later, especially when they're so smart and able to find a workaround. It takes out of another bucket. Absolutely.
yeah, I think that was ultimately what I hope people get from this, is because so often, and I think that's what's going to happen here is, pediatricians now have a very fluid timeline. And so, it's okay, they'll catch up. And the idea, there may be areas where they do catch up, but there also may be areas where they don't catch up, and it's not caught until first, third, fifth, whatever grade they come in, and you're already you're having to work backwards on a lot of this stuff and understand it all. And so ultimately, if we can start identifying this earlier, which is ultimately what we should be doing, right, is finding these areas, these struggles earlier, these churns earlier, rather than pushing them down the road and having to find them later on, and this poor child being mislabeled, misdiagnosed, misprescribed, whatever may happen because of this. And so ultimately, that's what I want for my parents and families. So, okay, good conversation.
Yes.
All right, I hope you all learned something. I hope that just helped you understand your kiddo better. That's ultimately why I think we have this conversation every week, is just to help parents understand their kiddos. We don't want, no one wants to be misunderstood or miscategorized, or, just that's, and so many kids are. And so we hope this helps you. And ultimately, there's somebody out there in your life who this could help, a teacher, a family member, a friend, whatever it may be. So please share this with them. And next week we'll be on again. We'll dive a little bit deeper into speech, and so we'll kind of go back a little bit and then push forward into speech, and why speech is so important, and how it all is built on the previous neurology. So, all right, there are a few people watching. If you have any questions, please fire them off right now. But until we get a question, Heather, where do people find you?
At the Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of the Woodlands, Katy, or Mansfield.
Awesome. So make sure you
Hi,
go.
Tony. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Make sure you go follow those pages, because Heather has another podcast, which you're going to want to listen to, because you all like to learn, right? Like we all like to learn. It's Tuesdays at 11. Do you have one coming up this week?
I do. It is about how do I handle my child's anger?
Ooh,
What are some root causes of that? How do you de-escalate and actually turn it into an opportunity for connection?
Beautiful. I love it. And we can all learn to be better, right? Like, so I might check into this too. So make sure you listen, you pay attention. It's great. She also has a lot of information on those pages. So please go follow and tune into that Tuesday. And then again, we will be back next Thursday, assuming no emergencies pop up. Sometimes they pop up. We run businesses, we have families, all that fun stuff. But assuming none of those pop up, we'll be back next Thursday, same time. And again, we'll be talking about speech, the importance of all of that, and why we shouldn't push that back from a milestone standpoint. All right. If there's no other questions, thank you for the comment, Tony. Really appreciate that. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week.
Yes, thanks, everyone. Have a great week. Bye.